A distinguished scholar and educator whose contributions have left an indelible mark on the fields of Mexican American studies, feminist theory, and cultural activism. Dr. Cotero's groundbreaking work extends across print and digital media, most recently centering on her dedicated involvement in community-based projects. I first encountered her work as a graduate student reading the novel Caballero by early 20th century folklorist Julio Gonzalez. Cotero co-recovered the novel when she was just a graduate student in 1996. Even at that early stage, she set the tone and terms of scholarly conversations about this foundational Latina author that persists until today. Likewise, Dr. Cotero's digital humanities project, Chicana por mi Raza, Digital Memory Collective, offers a profound genealogy of Chicana knowledge praxis to illuminate new frames of analysis and scholarly inquiry. This work showcases her commitment to amplifying marginalized voices and reimagining knowledge as a collective endeavor. Dr. Cotero, get ready for a long list. Dr. Cotero is the author of Native Speakers, Ella Cara de Loria, Zora Neale Hurston, Julio Gonzalez, and the Poetics of Culture, for which she was awarded the Gloria Anzaldúa Book Prize in 2009. In addition to Julio Gonzalez's novel, Dr. Cotero also edited and recovered her history MA thesis as Life Along the Border, a landmark Chicana thesis by Julio Gonzalez. Dr. Cotero's edited collection, Chicana Movidas, New Narratives of Activism and Feminism in the Movement Era, produced with Diana Espinosa and Miley Blackwell, came out in 2018. Her current book project, Fleshing the Archive, a field guide to Chicana knowledge praxis in the 1970s, maps, quote, a stunning cartography of Chicana knowledge projects in the 1960s and 70s, from community-based research centers to bibliographies, syllabi, and curriculum production to alternate media projects to illuminate the convergence between the digital present and the analog past and suggest a hidden genealogy of Chicana knowledge praxis that mobilizes new objects of study, frames of analysis, and models of scholarly inquiry to build futurities in which Chicanas can survive. And I cannot wait to read this book. Her journal articles and scholarly chapters are too numerous to list here. Taken as a whole, Dr. Cotero's books, articles, digitally curated collections, and public humanities projects reflect her deep engagement with issues of memory, representation, and community empowerment. Her contributions to projects like the Chicana por mi Raza Digital Memory Collective have not only preserved vital narratives, but have also facilitated access to historical resources for researchers, students, and community members alike. Throughout her career, Dr. Maria Cotero has garnered numerous fellowships, awards, and honors, including the American Council of Learning Societies Research Fellowship and the Harold R. Johnson Diversity Service Award. These accolades are a testament to her exemplary scholarship and dedication to advancing social justice. Dr. Cotero's multifaceted contributions as a scholar, activist, and community engaged organizer embody a spirit of transformative change and collective empowerment. Her work challenges us to rethink traditional boundaries and narratives, inspiring us to strive for a more inclusive and equitable future. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Maria Cotero.
Well, thank you for that incredible introduction. I'm just really appreciate how deeply you engaged in my work. Sorry, this for some reason this is here. I think I got it. If you can hear me. I just want to thank you for so deeply engaging with my work and you know, I'm very honored by your words. So thank you very much for that introduction. And I should say that it is also a great honor to be sharing space with scholars. Oh, sorry, this is the wrong thing. To be sharing space with, first of all, the directors of this incredible project, which I admire so much, and the mujeres who are here, who have been interviewed and who are part and at the central core of this amazing project. I really, really admire the work that has been done, and I'm really inspired by this dialogo that we've been having today. It's so important, and I think one of the things that you've done that we haven't done in Chicana por mi Raza is to bring people together. And so that, in that sense, you know, a big symposium like this, and I know Linda was on me last night saying, well, we gotta do a symposium too. So more work, but I think that, you know, it's really visionary to bring these multiple generations together in this larger encuentro. So I'm really grateful to be here with you this afternoon to have the opportunity to have a dialogue about the admittedly modest things that we can do as academics, teachers, and learners to transform, in the words of Sherry Moraga, a world on fire. For if we are refugees in this world, as she puts it, we also benefit from our access to infrastructures of discursive and informatic power, and thus it is our obligation to recircuit the channels through which this power operates. Sometimes the academy can seem unduly confining, as if all of our work is limited to a sphere that only impacts other scholars or at most transforms students for the short time that they are with us. But what I want to suggest in sharing the lessons that I've learned from my work with the Chicana por mi Raza Digital Memory Collective is that this is a false dichotomy that is grounded in an inherited system of values that centers individualist models of knowledge production. As decolonial scholars like Linda Tuwai Smith have observed, such approaches tend to objectify, extract, and dispossess forms of knowledge and ways of knowing that are critical to our survival in the academy and beyond. So a central question for decolonial digital practitioners like us in this room then is how we might work within the university, accessing its financial and technical infrastructures to recover the lost and hidden histories that document our lives, while also moving beyond its extractive knowledge practices to recover ways of knowing and infrastructures of care that have sustained us through colonization, enslavement, and empire. So in this presentation, I want to reflect on our work with the Chicana por mi Raza Digital Memory Collective, which is an oral history and archive project that documents Chicana feminist activism and organizing in the movement years. And I want to reflect on this project and some of the work we've done with it in order to elucidate how our digital praxis recovers not only historical memory, but also some part of ourselves. And I know that all the project participants can attest to this feeling of recovering some part of ourselves through this work. So 15 years ago, when I launched CPMR in collaboration with Linda Garcia Merchant, who was at the time, yeah, she deserves a big hand for tolerating me all these years. She, my daughter, when she goes on trips with us, she's like, God, you guys fight like sisters. And I was like, yeah, Linda calls me the sister she never wanted. She does. So when we started this project, right, neither of us knew anything about digital humanities. We started in 2009. I was recently tenured at the University of Michigan, and I had just published Native Speakers, the book that was just spoken about, which was a book about women of color intellectuals in the early 20th century. So I looked at African-American ethnographer Zora Neale Hurston, Jovita Gonzalez, who was a folklorist, and Ella Cara Deloria, who was a Dakota Sioux woman from South Dakota. And I had, brought them together to think about what does it mean to recover a woman of color genealogy. At the time, Linda was working a 9-to-5 job in Chicago while making movies about Chicanas on the side. And in many ways, we were naturally linked. And this is one of her movies, La Mujeres de la Caucus Chicana, which was spoken about earlier today, the Chicana Caucus of the National Women's Political caucus. So this is very apropos, right? In some ways, we were naturally linked by our mothers, who were friends in the movement. Linda had just finished making a film about Chicanas who were active in the National Women's Political Caucus that featured her mom, Ruth Rea Mojica Hammer, and my mother, Marta Cotera, who were frequent co-conspirators in both feminist and Chicanos movement spaces. She was thus keenly aware, as was I, that there was a huge gap in our historical understanding of Chicanas and feminism in the 1970s. Largely absent in the historiography of the Chicano movement, which centered male leaders and masculinist vision of militancy, Chicanas had also been left out of narratives of the women's movement, which tended to focus on East Coast organizations led by white women. As daughters of so this is an example of the kind of image of militancy that many of my students understood the Chicano movement through. This is the central prism. And some of you will recognize that these are members of the Brown Beret organization from LA in front of Casa Tlatelolco during the Denver Youth Conference. This became a really emblematic image of the Chicano movement. On the other hand, here's an action in in Atlantic City, in front of the Miss America pageant, where feminists were, after this action, which basically they were protesting the beauty pageant, and they said that they were going to, in a press release, said that they were going to burn symbols of patriarchy and sexism in a freedom trash can. And there's the freedom trash can. They didn't get a fire permit, so they didn't actually burn anything, but they just dropped bras and high heels and makeup into this, girdles into this trash can. But that's where women in the feminist movement came to be known as bra burners. So these are two very emblematic images, you know, and we're reminded, right, of that title of that book, you know, what is it? Some of Us Are Brave, right? So all the women are white, all the men are black, but some of us are brave. So what is the story of what happened to women who occupied both of these spaces? And this is a picture of a Chicana Brown Beret contingent in Wisconsin in front of the State House during a UFW march, I believe. So anyway, as I said, women Chicanas were largely absent in the historiography, the history books about the Chicano movement, and the books and films about the women's movement. And, you know, as daughters of Chicana feminists who published and organized in both of these movements throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Linda and I knew very well that there was a massive reservoir of untapped memory, both embodied and documentary. So in archives and things that women kept, and also in their lived memory, what they could tell us, right? So there was this idea that there was this sort of huge reservoir, right, of memory that was not being collected by institutional archives. And as a consequence of this archival absence, right, this led to this kind of feedback loop, right? So history books weren't being written about women because their materials and their oral histories were not in institutional archives where historians go to get their evidence for their claims about the past. And as a result of the history not being written, right, or them not being in the archive, the history weren't being written, archivists couldn't make arguments for collecting the materials of these women because they weren't in the history books. And so when I talk about this feedback loop of power knowledge, that's what I'm talking about. This idea that if you're not in the archive, you won't be in the books. And if you're not in the books, no one's going to think your archives are of value to be collected. So Linda and I decided to interrupt this feedback loop, right, by creating a repository we had in our heads in 2009. We're going to collect oral histories. One of the first oral histories, if not the first, was with Alma Canales, who is in this room. In 2009, we came down to Texas. It was the first place we came because my mom could put us all up, and we were like, well, we'll just come down and film oral histories with Alma Canales, Linda del Toro, who else? Maria Elena Martinez? No. Rosie Castro, and my mom. So 4 women, and our idea was we'll begin with the Raza Unida party because that's a network of women that we know that we can have access to, right? So that's where we started, small with 2 students. We came down to Texas, and a lot of adventures happened there. We can tell you about them off mic. It was fun time. We were really inspired by that trip. And so over the last 15 years, we just kept going. We just kept taking summer trips with students with no money. Linda had to take time off from work. She had to take like medical leave and vacation hours, and whew, it was rough. We made it happen. But over the last 15 years, Chicana por mi raza has transformed from a pretty small project to an effort to, record oral histories and make them available online, to a very large scale post-custodial recovery project led by a collective of scholars, students, researchers, elders, archivists, and cyber infrastructure specialists. We've grown the project really as a kind of collective effort. And that is why we changed our name from the Chicana por mi raza Digital Memory Project to the Chicana por mi raza Digital Memory Collective. And that is very, very important. That does a certain kind of work for us, always reminding us, right, that we cannot achieve what we're achieving without a collective effort, right? So I know post-custodial has already been defined, but essentially just to remind you, it's a post-custodial project in that we don't collect physical archives. We leave archives in place with mujeres in their homes. We mostly scan in their homes or other places that feel safe to them. Our oral histories are conducted usually lasting between 2 to 6 hours, not in one day, to everyone who's like, oh, no. Yeah. We usually do them in 2-hour blocks, but if we can spend a few days with a mujer, a veterana, then we will, because we really want to get at the richness of that story. We organize these archives in a digital repository that I can show you if you want a little bit later. Students work on the project. They travel with us to do interviews. We've always worked very closely with students. We've traveled. I tell people that our second trip was to California was kind of crazy. We traveled with my mom, Linda, 3 students who were so sick of us by the end of the trip, in a van across California, so it was an experience. So since 2009, we have digitized over 30,000 items, including newspapers, letters, photos, and hundreds of hours of oral histories. We have a much larger collection by great degrees than the Smithsonian, for example, much, much larger. CPMR online repository. So we store these materials in an online repository. It's called Clouder. Like I said, I can talk to you about the platform. I call it also the Chicana Memory Mothership. That's where everything sits. Women who contribute to the archive, it's important to note, they retain copyright over their words, their oral histories. They have access to their oral histories online, and they also retain copyright over their documents that we scan. So if someone wants to use one of their documents in a book or film, they have to receive permission from women or their heirs. We have a public-facing website and Instagram, which I can show you in a little bit. And lately, we have been extending our reach through partner projects and collaborative efforts, precisely like with the Mapping Chicana Mexicana Voices in the Borderlands and other projects. And I'm going to talk about that in the second half of my talk a little bit more. So it's important to point out that the archival landscape that we work in with Chicana por mi raza is far different from the regimented, controlled, and surveilled space of the institutional archive. And sorry, the archive is here. I'm not trying to insult you, archive, but I am a little bit. Just shading. Just shade, a little bit of shade. So yeah, the archive, if I ask my students if they've ever been to an archive, they agree. They are surveilled, highly surveilled spaces, not easy to get into. And the tragedy of that is that especially when you're looking at community activists and their work, right, there's a reason women also don't want to donate their materials to archives, because then they lose access to them. And this has happened to my own mother, who was an archivist for many years at the Benson. Linda's mother, my mother, collected her materials for the Benson Latin American collection, and they somehow lost a whole range of newspapers that her mother published at Clarín in Chicago. Like, it's astonishing that so little regard is paid to our collections and our materials. My mother fought for 30 years at the Benson for more respect to be paid to our materials and more attention, and that was a battle she lost. Although the Benson is better now. If there's anyone from the Benson, I'm going to continue insulting institutions and then apologizing. So yeah, this institutional archive, which is regimented, surveilled, contained, not open to our communities. And another thing is it so rarely includes histories from below. In contrast, we have traversed a sometimes unruly terrain, an archipelago of Chicana knowledge that spans across the Southwest and beyond, popping up here and there as islands of memory in attics and basements, in garages and home offices, under beds and in closets. Collecting across this intimate archipelago, we have come to understand the archive as something more than just a place or a collection of documents. We have come to understand it as a relation, an encuentro between the present and the past, where knowledge is produced. And I think today is like that. We see this, I would define this as an encuentro as part of the archive. This is part of the archive. In and through this process of intergenerational memory exchange. So imagining the archive not as a static site where we collect materials, but as an active encounter of memory. The term encuentro gestures to a long tradition of transnational feminist work in the Americas, in which women from different locations come together to exchange knowledge, share ideas, and collectively imagine different futures. As such, when I say that we should revision the archive as a locus of encuentro, it suggests both its relational and political potentialities as a site of intergenerational praxis. Indeed, as we have built the archive and learned from our elders in this collective work, we have also developed an approach to digital humanities that we have come to loosely define as Chicana digital praxis. We decided to give what we do a name because we realized that a lot of people were doing what we were doing. And so we thought, well, if we give it a name, then they have to cite us, right? And so that's our intention. Like, we're calling it something. Naming something is a form of power. We don't often do it. We don't do it enough. We don't lay claim, right, to our intellectual work by naming it in spaces like this. So we decided to name it Chicana Digital Praxis. So even if, as I say that, I also want to say that this framework is not intended to be prescriptive. In other words, it's not intended to be a rule book, right? Rather, it gives form to our way of work, bringing it into being as an epistemological model, a way of knowing that can be deployed in different contexts. It doesn't just have to apply to Chicanas. It can apply to Black feminist memory. It can apply to really any group that has been marginalized or left out of the historical record. And so it can be applied, and we also expect it to be built on and improved, right? It's just a gesture, a way of naming what we're doing so that we can continue the work and share with others and start building a collective around it. So whereas traditional models of knowledge in the academy center the extraction of data and the production of recognizable knowledge forms, like scholarly articles, books, or archival collections and digital humanities, we would call them data sets. Our Chicanx digital praxis is shaped not just by the end product or what we can collect, but by a set of three overlapping concerns. The first is building knowledge by and about Chicanas and Latinas in the movement years. So we have a scope, right? We're talking about the movement years. We're focusing on women. We're focusing on Chicanas and Latinas. And some white women are in our archive too. For example, Sally Andrade, right? Many of whom, she was in the Raza Unida party. She was a close collaborator with my mother, white woman who married Erasmo Andrade, and they were very involved in Crystal City in the Raza Unida politics, right? So it's not exclusively Chicanas. So the first circle is building knowledge about Chicanas and Latinas. The second is nurturing future generations through skill building and transgenerational memory exchange. So this idea of nurturing students at what's happening in this room, right, as a form of transgenerational memory exchange, and also building, expanding a terrain of expertise across a broad community of practice. So I'll talk a little bit about what we mean by this. So I'm going to go through each of these circles pretty quickly to talk about what each entails. So first, building knowledge. The most obvious place where this is happening is our repository. And this is these are two images of the repository. And like I said, afterwards, I can show it to you how it works. But basically, this is online. It's login protected, so not anyone can get in. If someone is interested in looking at the materials we collect, we invite them to submit a proposal for what they want to do and what they're studying, and also a proposal for what they can do to help the project. Because we want people to understand that our repository is not a resource to be mined by scholars to write their books and articles. It is collective space, which means that if you are wanting to look at our archive, you don't get just get to take, right? You have to give too, because we aren't funded by any major grants, right? So the idea is you submit a proposal for your research and a proposal for what you can do. Maybe that means correcting tags and metadata, improving the archive in various ways, or creating a curation for our public website. So these are the data sets are these are collections that you see on your left, and on the right is a single item, right? Is an image that has tags. And so these tags are ways to search for items across the repository. The other way that we produce knowledge in the digital age is through public curation on websites. And you all saw a presentation today about the beautiful website that Mapping Chicanas and Mexicana Voices in the Borderlands is creating. We have a similar website. You can put your phone on this little QR code and go straight to our website if you'd like to take a look at it. I think the important thing to point out about the website is all of the material on the website is produced by students, for the most part. Occasionally, scholars doing research will produce a biography or, add to our timelines. But our website includes, biographies of mujeres, timelines, and short historical essays written by students who have been working in the archive. And these are all students who have worked to work on the archive. Another way that we create knowledge in the public realm is through student-generated content on our Instagram page. There's our Instagram page. So students who are processing in the archive will write reflection pieces, for example, on newspapers that they might find, or they are also sometimes they write biographies of women for the Instagram. And this is how the young people, actually the millennials, I guess, use Instagram, right? The youngsters are all on TikTok. We're not there yet, I'm sorry. But soon we will be. So if you're interested in kind of getting up-to-date knowledge about the website or about the project, you can go to our Instagram page. Let's see, go back here. The slideshow, sorry. Another form of knowledge and creation and knowledge production that we engage with is through public engagement. We have created two shows, and I'm not going to get too much into them. I'm happy to answer questions about them. Both of these exhibits were in Detroit, and I just want to point out, again, we don't have major funding. And so what we did is I worked with students in a class in the art department called Designing for Exhibitions. And so we used our collections as case studies for the students to design their own exhibitions. And we had those exhibitions. The first one was Las Rebeldes, which was oral histories from Southeastern Michigan, where we talked about mujeres. We told the history of Michigan through Mujeres Voices. And that was actually a partnership with the School of Social Work and my history project at Museo del Norte. And the School of Social Work gave us an old office or an old house that they had been working in Southwest Detroit, and our students did a pop-up exhibit there. But the other project, Nancy de los Santos's photographs, that was at Wayne State University in their Walter Reuther collection exhibit space. So I've been talking a lot about students, and I think it's important to point out that students have always been central to our praxis. They're really the beating heart of our praxis of digital recovery. We've traveled with them with scanners and video equipment to the homes of women who were active in the movement years, conducted oral histories, digitized as many archival documents as possible in a few days. Like our students really, they jam on that scanner. They scan and process these digitized documents and video. They catalog and apply metadata and upload materials to our Clouder content management system. They create curations for our public websites. I mean, they really do the work. They are paid, by the way, do the work of the project under our mentorship, right? While they don't conduct oral history interviews, and I'm happy to answer why this is. They are much more than just passive observers in our interviews. In fact, they are the heart of our praxis of archival encuentro. As critical witnesses to the stories of struggles told by elders, they form a key part of that intergenerational conduit. I think of it as a conduit of memory transmission, which is a form of knowledge exchange that has been critical to the survival of indigenous communities and communities of color for generations, the oral tradition, the tradition of story sharing, of passing down knowledge from generation to generation. So rather than simply data gathering, right, our interviews are opportunities for learning through that process of intergenerational story sharing, recreating those processes. Whereas dominant scholarly discourse values interpretation, the act of applying one's theoretical expertise to the evidence, right, of data or history, our praxis privileges a process, right, the process of collection, which I might add is typically the province of feminized labor, right? Collecting is what women do, right? Archivists, librarians, etc. And, scholars interpret, right? We place all of really the focus is on that process of collection as a critical site of transformative knowledge. Our interviews are thus explicitly framed as an intimate, even familial process of Chicana memory exchange in which students act not as documenters who record the scene and capture the knowledge, but as critical witnesses who are essential participants in the storytelling. This approach has been informed by the work of Indigenous women and women of color oral historians who are attentive to the intersubjective, affective, and transformational dimensions of story sharing. So drawn into familial relationship to the project, students feel accountable for producing knowledge about the past that will honor the memory of the women whose stories they have witnessed. But as critical witnesses, they also see themselves embedded in the story, and thus they develop new insights about the workings of power and the long tradition of non-institutional knowledge making hiding in plain sight. For many of the women we interview, our students' presence as critical witnesses in the encuentro not only highlights the urgency of the project of preserving this memory, but it also surfaces long-standing traditions of memory exchange with their abuelitas, their tias, etc. In their presence, women share sometimes painful memories, stories of loss and vulnerability, but also stories of strategic maneuvering, like we heard this morning, and sometimes even chisme, usually spoken off camera, that brings new insights about struggles past and present. So it's that chisme knowledge that can become perhaps even the most important knowledge. So these women understand that our students are not just empty vessels to be filled with memories of the past. Rather, through the process of encuentro, they inhabit the stories and they make new knowledge with them, refracting and remixing the past through their own embodied memory work. Our students come to understand that theory making and knowledge production are not confined to the academy, that they take place in far more quotidian and familiar spaces, like our mother's kitchens. Finally, I want to say something about building a community of practice. This is something that Linda has taught me. In fact, Linda created this slide, which shows that our community is not just academics. It includes librarians, it includes community members, it includes las veteranas that we talk to, it includes students, it includes people who develop our data management system. So it's a really broad community. But in recent years, the Chicana por mi Raza Collective has also grown to include strategic partnerships with collaborators in regions that are rich in Chicanx history, but do not have access to the cyber infrastructure necessary to support a large-scale digital humanities project like Chicana por mi Raza. So these partnerships allow us to share our technical knowledge that we've developed over the last 15 years, and perhaps more critically, they provide access to our technical resources, our infrastructure, which not many people have access to, but we do because we have negotiated with institutions and we have this wonderful platform that people can use to store the data that they're collecting, right? So as part of the Chicana por mi Raza Collective, these partner projects play a critical role because the material artifacts and oral histories that they collect and upload into our shared data management system expand not only the geographic scope, And I think that the great example is what y'all are doing with this project, you know, and we've been talking on the back end about, you know, storing their data, right? So that's increasing our geographic scope, right? And it also proliferates the span of our Chicana archive. So our archive can grow without us necessarily being at the lead of that process. But they also expand the CPMR collective. They bring in new researchers, community members, and students into the fold. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this project that we did in Nuevo Mexico. But we have also done a project in Colorado. In what year was this? After New Mexico, 2022? Yeah. And in 2023, we were at UCSC doing the Jose Hidalgo de la Riva Digital History Project. And where's Brittany? Brittany worked on that project. That's where we first met her. And we'll continue to work on that project, building OSA's collection. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we do in the field schools at the end of this talk, which is coming soon, in case anyone needs to go to the bathroom. Our work with partner projects has also really transformed our praxis, expanding and deepening our understanding of digital care work, as I will discuss shortly. So before I move on to show and to talk about how the field schools have changed how we see the project, I want to just reiterate that at the center of our praxis of digital recovery is what I have come to call memory keeping. I'm not new in this. I'm drawing from the work of Chicanas and Indigenous scholars on the question of memory keeping. It's basically a knowledge process that foregrounds relatedness, affect or emotion, and intergenerational memory exchange. So memory keeping is grounded in the many acts of remembering and information sharing that, as Cindy Fierros and Dolores Delgado Bernal have argued, constitute a Chicana epistemology. It frames our praxis of digital recuperation as a collective endeavor, a process whereby multiple collaborators have shared responsibility for preserving and activating Chicana memory. It foregrounds relationships over new fancy digital tools. It's more important for us, we see, to develop relationships than get the newest cutting edge technology, right? Self-determination over institutional visibility and assimilation. So self-determination is a term that's going to be very reminiscent for some of the veteranas in this room. This idea of autonomy and self-determination was absolutely central to the Chicana movement and Chicanas in the Chicana movement. So knowledge for us, by us, about us, basically, over, you know, shifting our, I guess, protocols or whatever to satisfy the needs of a grant, right? It also centers pedagogy and capacity building over ownership of knowledge, right? So in the academy, ownership of knowledge is everything, right? Claiming, you know, your right to a certain theme or idea or whatever, insight, right? Actually, we're far more interested in sharing insights, sharing what we've learned, and expanding the field of the process. So let me see, where am I? Okay. It also engages a Rasquachi digital praxis that creatively reuses existing infrastructures to achieve these aims. Memory keeping, in other words, decenters the university as a site of knowledge power by building community knowledge hubs and distributed knowledge networks. This approach to archival development demands that we reimagine the archive as both a site for the preservation of historical memory and a set of living relationships, which don't end once the collection of data is done, right? So once you interview a woman and collect her archive, you best believe that you will be following up with her, touching base with her, you know, meeting with her at various places. This is not, oh, thank you, ma'am, slam. Wait, what is that? Slam, bam, thank you, ma'am. That's a terrible analogy, but right. It's a relationship, right? What we are building in and through our praxis of oral history, archival collection, digitization, historical interpretation is much more than just a digital collection. It's also a collective, a structure of feeling nurtured through many acts of knowledge sharing, both private and public. In centering an ethics of care in our memory keeping, we challenge traditional concepts of the archive as a static repository waiting to be mined by properly credentialed scholars. We also push against extractive modes of knowledge production that reduce lived memory and carefully preserve documents to their use value as historical evidence. When we envision the archive as a relation, new ethical and methodological questions arise. Why are we preserving this archive? What is our intention? What is our responsibility to the archive and the past it documents? In what ways are we engaging the memory that it preserves? It reminds us that we must treat shared memories, archival or embodied, with the love, care, and respect that we would give our relatives, and invites us to see beyond their value as documentary evidence of a past well buried. This is the affective, intellectual, and methodological home space of our digital care work. So to end up, I want to leave you with an example. So I've talked in these abstract ways about what we do and the philosophy behind it, but I want to give you an actual example of the work of care that happens in this home space of Chicana digital praxis. So I want to share a case study of a field school we organized in northern New Mexico in 2021. And I just want to say these photos were taken by one of our collaborative members, Dr. Jaylenda Maria. And so I'm going to do like a little visual essay, just a few minutes to share with you what it was like to do this work. So this partnership was first conceived in 2018 when members of the CPMR collective, myself, Dr. Linda Garcia Merchant, and our dear colleague, Dr. Dion Espinosa, traveled to northern New Mexico to interview Enriqueta Vasquez. Some of you may know her. She is a central figure of the Chicano movement in Nuevo Mexico and beyond. She was a co-editor and regular contributor to El Grito del Norte. Vasquez, and the other editor, of course, was the infamous and beloved Betita Martinez, lion of the social justice movement and civil rights, que en paz descanse. She was also an important feminist voice in the struggle. Enriqueta was also an important feminist voice in the struggle for land, indigenous rights, and the preservation of cultural heritage in Nuevo Mexico. Her home and surrounding land, its adobe buildings, Campo Santo, means cemetery, and its communal spaces hold the traces of important social justice networks that stretch between Colorado and northern New Mexico and far back into the early 20th century. And yet, when we interviewed Vasquez in 2018, we were shocked to discover that her archive had still not been collected by any major institution. She is perhaps one of the most notable Chicanas nationally to have been writing in the period. So following that trip, we launched the Enriqueta Vasquez Digital History Project in partnership with Dr. Teresa Tessa Cordova, who was at the time an adjunct at the University of New Mexico and also the founder of Las Pistoleras Instituto de Arte y Cultura, a local collective of Chicana and indigenous women based in El Prado, New Mexico, which is just a few miles outside of Taos. Together, Linda and Tessa worked on a 2-week regionally focused field school, and they worked for a year on this, organizing it and coming up with the idea of it. And the idea was that the field school would be housed at Las Pistoleras, and students would digitize the remainder of Enriqueta Vasquez's material for CPMR and prepare them to be acquired by an institutional collection. So we scanned about, I would say about 35 or 40% of her materials. So we still had a good half to do when we returned. And so it was going to be the object of this field school and these students to scan the rest of it and to meet Enriqueta and learn more about her. So let me get back to my place. So funded through a grant and aid from the U.S. Latinx Digital Humanities Initiative and at the University of Houston, as well as other institutional supporters, including the University of New Mexico, Colorado College, and UNC Chapel Hill, the field school drew heavily on Tessa's wide-ranging network of Chicanx scholars and community experts who were part of Las Pistoleras Collective. The idea was to provide students enrolled in the course with an immersive, hands-on research experience in northern New Mexico that would ground their digital work in the specificities of place. If you ever been to New Mexico and you know Mexicanos from New Mexico, you know that place is critical. It's very important. And so our field school, yes, we were going to be scanning archives, but it was really about place and placemaking. So for the next few weeks, a profound process of digital care work unfolded for us, which really expanded our concept of the archival encuentro in particularly illuminating ways, even as it reinforced the critical importance of memory keeping as a digital praxis. So Tessa insisted that it was important for us to deeply experience the time space of the place that we were documenting. This meant slowing everything down, if not abandoning our agreed upon schedule. And I'm very schedule oriented, so this was hard for me. So abandoning our schedule, adjusting it to honor the conscious and embodied exploration of space and its meanings, and paying close attention to the ways in which space is shaped by social practices that map meaning onto the landscape. On the first day of the field school, Tessa organized a tour of 2 burial grounds, the Kit Carson Cemetery in Taos, where the city's white founding fathers are memorialized, and the more humble Camposanto that is right next to Enriqueta's home in San Cristobal, where many of the Chicano movement activists are buried. Reading regional space through the distinct landscapes of these sites of memorialization, students began to understand why and how space matters, and how the Camposanto, which is next door to Enriqueta's home, is actually a critical part of her story. This digital care work also required that we take time for everyday acts of remembrance, interrupting the flow of learning to pause with nature and gain a different, more intimate knowledge of place. It meant learning about the struggle over space, resources, and autonomy from women like Pistolera Petra Quintana, who taught us about the importance of acequias, traditional water systems, to both Pueblo and Mexicano communities in Taos and surrounding regions. We learned about struggles for environmental justice from Pablo Martinez, who recounted community efforts to stop dangerous mining in Puesta, New Mexico. We were immersed in Dave Real's storytelling, which provided a vivid picture of the region and its people. Even our lunch breaks were occasions to reflect on what it meant to care for each other in this place. Each day at noon, we gathered under the portico at Tessa's mother's house, Dr. Kathy Cordova, which is adjacent to Las Pistoleras, by the way, to eat a communal meal prepared by members of the collective who shared the history and cultural significance of the food that they had prepared for us. And every day they offered a blessing at the beginning of our meal. Through all of these collective acts of embodied memory, we came to understand how our small effort, the digitization of Enriqueta's archive, might fit into the whole as just one more way to articulate memory and place in northern New Mexico. So as students developed their sense of place in and through these activities, they were also introduced to skills and knowledges of a more practical nature that would help them in their task for the second week. So there's a 2-week field school. The first week was immersion in the history and the context of the place, and then to get that story. And the second week was actual work, scanning her archive. So they learned about visual narrative and digital media from Dr. Jaylin de Maria, who took these beautiful photos. Dr. Margie Montañez, curator for Latino and Latin American collections at UNM, led a workshop on archives and archival theory. I introduced them to the Chicana por mi Raza Digital Memory Collective and explained our workflows, our processes, and our philosophy. Enriqueta Vasquez visited Las Pistoleras twice, at the beginning of the first week before students had begun the scanning process, and on the last day of the field school. So on her first visit, Enriqueta read from her recently published collection of stories, Cuentos y Poetry, and she answered students' questions about her life. And here's an interesting thing that happened on that day when she visited us. So there was an empty chair beside her. And as students began asking her questions, they instinctively sensed that respeto would require them not to just shout their queries from across the room. Instead, each student This began with the first student tentatively approached the chair and asked if they could sit by her to ask their questions. And what this did was, it was like a new scene of memory exchange playing out, like little mini oral histories that reminded us of how knowledge of the past is shaped in and through the process of intergenerational dialogue in our communities. On the last day of the field school, students followed this impromptu practice. They set up a chair by her, right? So they kind of took a clue from what had happened by accident on the first day. And this time, as they occupied the honored seat adjacent to Enriqueta, they shared their most intriguing archival finds and asked questions about the documents they wanted to know more about. So these conversations, which bookended the students' encounter with Enriqueta's archive, did more than simply help them to better understand her documents as performances of intergenerational memory exchange where respect, relatedness, and deep listening are critical. They highlighted the stakes of our students' work, reminding them that we too are all memory keepers. So expanding the scene of archival encuentro from the intimate space of the home where most of our oral histories and archives are digitized to the public space of the community and the land and the community's infrastructures of care deepened our praxis and reminded us that memory keeping can take many forms. It also illuminated the precarious conditions of Chicana memory, even in the digital age. And I should say that when we went back to pick up some of Enriqueta's materials, I went with Margie Montañez up to her house in San Cristobal. She lives in a traditional adobe house with adobe floors. And already some of the boxes that we had left stored there for safekeeping, we took them out of her goat shed, by the way, and put them in her home. They had plants growing through them. Right. So this is the precarious state of Chicana memory. This is not exclusive to her, right? And also, even in the digital age, Chicana memory is precarious. For example, our internet service at Las Pistoleras was excruciatingly slow and was cut off entirely the first time all our students logged in because someone thought it was like some kind of data hijacking thing. And so like they turned off our internet completely. And so Tessa and Linda had to troubleshoot. There's an active picture of Linda troubleshooting midstream in the middle of when we were trying to scan to switch to a business plan that was much more expensive, but not actually much of an improvement. And so this threw a serious wrench in our data management process, since uploading to our platform or even to Google Drive was almost impossible. It also impacted our workflow and slowed down the cataloging process considerably, since students were working in teams on Google Sheets, which would always freeze up because there wasn't enough service, right? And due to service interruptions. So I don't think I need to remind anyone here that this precarity is the product of systemic disinvestment in the digital infrastructures that communities in rural areas need and deserve. And it was just brought home to us when we tried to do this project there. And it is also a reminder of our privileged positions as digital humanists at Research One institutions. Moreover, our collaboration with Pistoleras also challenged any lingering tendencies we might have had towards digital utopianism, particularly the general assumption that digitization was a goal sought by everyone in the community, which it was not. When we invited members of Las Pistoleras Collective from Taos Pueblo to bring photos and documents to scan at our community digitization workshop on Sunday, they politely declined, pointing out that not all communities who have been left out of the historical record wish to be digitally preserved. And this was a really important insight. Sometimes digital care work means not documenting. I hope this this overview of the Chicana por Mi Raza project and the digital care work at its center has helped to illustrate the possibilities and challenges for community building knowledge projects that have been enabled by the emergence of new digital tools. Since our project started in 2009, we have accomplished a huge amount of work using these digital tools. We have collected hundreds of oral histories. We've amassed the largest digital collection of Chicana archives in the world. We've launched partner projects in Wisconsin, Chicago, Houston, Minnesota, New Mexico, Colorado, and Santa Cruz. We've curated 2 public exhibits, We've developed a number of resources for teaching, research, and project development. And all this work would not have been possible without scanners, digital video equipment, Excel sheets, shared data management platforms, and all the rest, right? So we do rely on the tools of the digital age. But lest I leave you believing in a digital utopia, I should also point out that our care work remains at the margins of the digital humanities world. Indeed, we have done this work largely without assistance of any major library or national grant. We rely on faculty research funds, small grants from various universities, server space at a series of institutions, and of course, plentiful student labor. We might think of this as a digital mutual aid model, pooling our collective, institutional, relational, and individual resources to make collecting trips and field schools happen. The Chicanas in this room will know just what that means. You make it happen, even if you don't have a big grant or a lot of power. This is an admittedly precarious funding model that nonetheless allows us the autonomy and self-determination that is critical to our Chicanx digital praxis. Our structural precarity in the field is reflective of marginalized archives everywhere, both digital and physical. And while it has been a challenge, it has also forced us to think about the archive in new ways, to ask different questions of it, to interrogate what it is, where it is, and who it is. It has pushed us to consider what it means to do digital humanities beyond the university and its related institutions. For us, this means developing a Chicana knowledge undercommons, a space of connection by capitalizing on and building alternative knowledge networks inside and outside the academy. It means working closely with students and community partners and finding creative ways to interface our public work with our research and our teaching and our desire for a different future. It means caring for each other as much as we care about the archive. Indeed, our Chicanx digital praxis reveals that the archive is not a place or even a collection of artifacts. The archive is us. Thank you. Ooh, that was kind of long, y'all. I went long. Sometimes when I go off script, that happens. Oops. Hiring.
Community like oriented and inspirational presentation and just all the work that you've been doing. So I'm going to open it up to questions that y'all might have. Okay, I've been telling everybody to use the microphone and I'm nice. And then I can go.
Oh, you circulate. Caused it. Spill over
Anybody
here.
have any questions?
It's a
So you can sit behind that's how you put it.
And the work that you all do when in conversations about doing this as someone working in the academy. And the different kinds of, lack of funding, but still kind of persevering. And my question is more geared toward. We know that we do this because we love working with community, but we also have these kind of institutional positions where, we are charged with producing scholarship, we're charged with so I'm wondering how you just kind of navigate both of those within your position.
Yeah, that's a great question, especially for the graduate students in the room. I think, the first article I ever wrote about the project, I did not write about the data we collected or interpret the data we collected. I wrote about the process. And so I think one of the easiest ways to think about this is that you are producing an art, and it's true, we as academics are required to be productive. And that doesn't mean doing field studies. That means writing articles and books, right? And I will say that since tenure, you're an administrator, so you know what this means. I got tenure in 2008, and it's 2024, and I have not been promoted. And that's because there hasn't been a second book. Because in order to get promoted in the academy, to achieve full, I would have to write a book. And for many years, I was I've been singing this little tune about how I'm not going to be extractive. I'm not going to use their stories to shore up my career. And here I am, everyone's telling me we have to write a book about them. And I didn't, and, you know, when I started working on fleshing the archive, this manuscript right now, I was like, my first line was, I did not want to write this book. And my husband was like, that is a really dumb way to start your book. Let's like, you don't think it's funny? And he was like, no. That is a dumb way to write a book. So, you know, I had resisted like creating knowledge from the knowledge that I had, but I also understood that it's important that these stories were told. And even if we're telling them through the website, you know, it also to be taught in class and to be circulated, et cetera. A book needs to be done. But one of the ways I got around it is I just started writing about my practice and my work with Linda and, you know, just sort of thinking about the theory behind our practice. Because so often people would like give us this very condescending attitude of like, oh, it's so good that you're doing that for the community and pat me on the head and like super condescending. And especially like, I would go to these, like, I went to Berkeley, I remember I was on this panel about history of the movement years, and this woman had gone before me, a high theory woman, and she was like, and now we have a more, what did she say, what was the word? She was very dismissive. Oh, a more empirically based project. That's like an insult. Those of you not in their county, like, if you're in their county, that's like, oh, bitch, what? Sitting there like, oh. I knew what she was doing. She was shaming me like, oh, you're just collecting. And in the economy, it's like, there's a value system that's really screwed up. And that value system sees librarians and archivists, which is gendered labor. Most librarians, many librarians and archivists are women, as just doing the busy work of the academy. And then we scholars go in and take all, you know, the evidence they collected for us and do the real work. And we interpret, we write our books and all of that. And I was really like taking on this project with Linda was really pushing back on that. And so I began to write about my practice and just saying like, what are the theoretical dimensions of my practice? Don't just call it collecting. Collecting is a theory. There's a proposition being made here. And it's, you know, so like, you know, there's a hierarchy in the academy though, about like that empirical work and interpretive work. So really it became, you know, through like the first essay I wrote for SAQ and then later for the American Board of the Critical Digital Humanities, I wrote Master of Historia and then for Chicana Vidas. I wrote the practices of Chicana memory. All of these are reflections on the theoretical dimensions of the practice, making it visible because this is Chicana theory. Chicana theory doesn't just happen aquí en las nubes. It's a theory that is placed into action. And so it became kind of my goal to like really push back against this idea that the only kind of theory that could happen is like the interpretive process, right? I'm taking this data and I'm making my claim about the Chicana movement. We know, we've read the books, right? And so I wanted to say something like, well, if you're going to think about unipolar praxis, and that praxis word is important because it means having theories about the world and power, applying them in the real world, seeing what the results are, and then having those theories then take in those results and rethink theories. So it's this constant process. And that our work has really been about that, like, you know, like applying the theories that we have, interviewing women, learning from them. And really over the time, you know, of talking to women, I realized that their stories, like the stories you read this morning, those stories were really reshaping how we understood the project. And so I have been, that was a long-winded answer to your question, which is if you are undertaking a project like this, you need to write about it and put it out there. You know, we just wrote about this, if you're the editor for the special issue of TVQ, we just wrote collectively, collaboratively, all the people who were involved in this project wrote about the field school. But I think, you know, that's where you get started. And then if you can get over them, then you can start writing about what to collect and what it tells you about the past. But I think, you know, as you're doing a project, you really need to name it. Because otherwise it's invisible and people will take your ideas and they will name it. And then they get the prizes, right? And the accolades and all of that. And again, this is in tension with that idea of like, you know, we value autonomy over visibility because there are times when Linda and I get really frustrated, like, you know, like, how come we don't get prizes?
We're not, and sometimes we'll apply to like the NEH and stuff, and then we will always, almost always realize like, we can't do our project the way they want us to do it. So we could get an NEH grant, but we recently submitted a draft for one, and then it'll, after doing all that work, like months of work, we're like, no, I don't think so. Because they just wanted us to, so much, they wanted us to change so much about what we do, and what we do is really grounded in that Chicana epistemology. And that's, always comes back to that. That's why we wrote the protocols. To like always remind ourselves, like, and we were having this meeting right after the NEH, and we were like, everyone was feeling bad about it, like, everyone was like, really don't like this feedback, I don't like what they want us to do. And then finally, we were all down, and Linda and I were like, we don't want to do the project they want us to do. And then I was like, remember our protocol. Autonomy is more important than visibility and recognition, because you give up a lot. And these Chicanas in the movement understood this. How do you work within a system, but maintain your autonomy and not let the system chew you up and spit you out and make you a model of what they want you to be? Right? And this is, I've learned from my mother, from all women in this room. No, this lesson. I went off.
On a personal note, I think you heard some of the sacrifices that we go through when we become involved in the polis and the projects around us. How did you and your mom manage that when she was doing it and you were, and then later when you followed in her footsteps? We always become our mothers. I know that.
Yeah, I mean, Linda and I think Linda could also answer this question, and some of the leaders they were just learning, and I can't remember who. Now, I think it was actually, yeah, I mean, we went everywhere with them. We went to all the conferences, we went to all the marchas. Chicana por mi casa, that image that I showed you in the early part, that is kind of accompanies all our stuff, that's from a poster that my mother gave me that she carried in the marginal park. When there was an incident of police brutality in Far Texas. And guess who showed up? That was the first action of the medicine of us that party, it was just morning, 1970. The party had just formed. And the first action the Pettis did, and why? Because they knew that they wouldn't be, their husbands might be fired. And so back then, a bunch of Pettis in Crystal City were like, let's go march on Far. And they carried that poster. And that poster is now the title of our project. Right? Yes, I'm a feminist, but I am a feminist because it's central to the survival of my people. Right? Those two things can exist together. And so we experienced, Yumba is a very good film about this. Sylvia Morales created a beautiful bit of film called Crushing Love. And it's about mothers and their daughters in the movement and having their children. Not just adults. So she introduced an Akshay Moraga, Dolores Huerta, my mom, she met your mom, and so she talked about these women and she made the film with her. Crushing Love. It's a beautiful film, great for a classroom. Yeah. But we, huh? My mother? Oh, yeah, I'm on that too. But I think, for us, this was a date, like y'all, some of y'all who are younger may not understand this, and certainly I as a mother, it's shocking to me, but this was before strollers, really. This was before you went out with, your Jeep Wrangler stroller, these gigantic strollers that had compartments for everything, and you had all these things to entertain. What did we have? Paper clips and legal pad, paper clips. So our mothers would always, they would say, oh, a table like this, that's great. They would throw a rebozo down on the bottom and put us to sleep under the. You were talking about this. You went everywhere. So we went to the marchas and we didn't go with all the equipment that we have now. It was like dog out there. So Yeah, I mean, women went out there with their children. We all went to the IWA conference. We were in Houston, we were at the National Women's Political Conference as little babies. So, we experience this from that vantage point. So, yeah, women have real struggles to raise children and be committed. But they did it.
We made it.
You made it. Other Petita, by the way. Petita Martinez.
Hi, my name is Isaac Amato. I'm in higher education and faculty member here at UTA. And I really like the work that we've shared today. A lot of it because the way that you talk about ownership and it not being, not necessarily, like it belongs to the people that you're collecting it from, right? It belongs, it stays within the community. And you briefly mentioned something about a grant and kind of having to also, compromise, well, not necessarily compromise, but how do you not compromise that when you have grant funding is my question.
Well, I mean, we actually, I also mentioned a mutual aid model, and we've done 2, 3 partnerships. 2 field schools, so the one in Mexico and then the one we recently did in UCSC, and that was just people on the ground raising money. Like Tessa, asked her friends to put up the students in the field school. Like they stayed all through in Taos in people's homes, right? So that they could afford to participate for 2 weeks. Tessa Las Pistoleras provided us all of food. Like they raised money from the community to pay for that food. We didn't have people. They made it, right? And so I think that's one model. UCSC was very different because that's an R1 institution. And when we were there, like Tessa Teresa Mora, honestly, pardon my French, but worked her ass off to get us, a room, a space, catering every day. She was the head of libraries there. She's a person of some power, and she also worked on ground really hard. Just to raise those for local funding, right? Which is how we used to do it in the past. We have come to rely on the NEH and, not Melon, we love you, thank you. This is wonderful, but yeah. But, it's like, I think, there are benefits to having a major grant, but like that was really what happened to us when we decided to apply for the NEH, and we were encouraged by the way to apply for the NEH. They're very encouraging, but we would have to sacrifice so much of how we do things to get that, whatever, measly 280, and half of it was going to the institution, 51% cost sharing. No. It's like, why does everyone else get a piece of the pie? Like, when we can actually, this idea of mutual aid, which is very popular with the young people these days, right? It's like, how do we pool our resources? We can make this happen. We have pots of money. We have access to the institution. We have access to R1 institutions. That's super powerful. There's money to be had. It just takes more work. But it has less encumbrances. The Mellon and the other foundations, not the Mellon, but the NEH and the other foundations are going to always ask for something in return, and we kind of value autonomy and self-determination, whether or not it makes us more precarious, because we can do people less. It gives us freedom, to do things the way we want. And I just want to say another thing about the Santa Cruz model. As wonderful as it was to be in an R1, there were also big drawbacks to that, because the vibe was not easy, right? The institution, we were standing mostly down to the Liba queer filmmakers archive. She had been kicked out of her PhD program at UCSC. So going back for her was not just an act of huge bravery and forgiveness, right? But also deeply triggering and painful. And so it wasn't like the love fest in the Pistoleras. I mean, Brittany can speak to this. It was hard. I mean, Bosa broke down on several occasions. And even in her interview that we did there in that room, she was like looking out at the trees and looking at this place and reading it. as a place, not a harm, but a place where I can come alive again, I can be again. But so when you even link to an institution with all of its advantages, it can also like, it can also bring in spirits. Dare I say, like not to get too, but it can bring in ghosts that are hard, you know, to navigate them, you know. Because up until we started doing these field schools, we've always done interviews of women's homes. And that's just, that intimate space is so different, right, than being in these sort of, for all their benefits, these institutional spaces. Yeah. I don't know if I even answered the question.
Yeah, I remember when Teatro Campesino from Puerto Rican came to Idaho to coach students. And they stayed in our house. And there were like 25 members in it. And I had 2 kids and I had several siblings that also lived with us. And it was just amazing because they would walk in and there's like people everywhere. Sleeping on the floor, sleeping on the couches, sleeping everywhere, 25 people, okay. And they stayed for what, about a month? About a month, okay.
Did you actually give us that bathroom? Talk about it.
Yeah, yes, and we always had people staying over because there would be some kind of fundraiser or something. And they would come to Napa to honor. And of course, we, for some reason, I didn't fit in. And that time it was about 35 members from Teatro Margarito, from Jacinto Trevino. To read this. Yeah. Old school. Yeah.
I have a quick question. We're still an active organization, right? Organizing and stuff. And I hate to say it, but I'm an analog girl.
Yeah.
So what do you suggest? We have boxes and boxes and boxes of files being like, you know, I'm an oldster, so how do we just mortalize me the thought of having these millions of boxes and how to go through them, and it just seems overwhelming. So how do I get over that?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I just moved back to Austin and living with my parents, and we had to clear out my mother's office, so I could put an apartment, like a little garage apartment, and, you know, hundreds and hundreds of boxes. She had a Chicana Research and Learning Center clearinghouse. So not just her materials, but she got stuff from all over in the 70s and collected it in her clearinghouse so she could share it with others, you know. And someone else taught my mother's, you know, that what is the connection? My mother was an information scientist. Her contribution to the movement wasn't just organizing women, it was also organizing information. And I came to this realization after doing this project for 10 years, I'm like, oh my God, I am my mother. But anyway, I don't have all the boxes, I just have all the digital files. But I think, you know, this is one of the reasons why in the Chicana, why I began with what can we do with our connection to resources and infrastructures at our one institutions, because we're in a very privileged position to ensure that collections like yours are preserved, if only digitally, at least that's something, right? And I think that's where, you know, partnering with a local university to do a digital project, you know, what we have is our connections to institutions and infrastructures. So I can say like, oh yeah, let's do a film school, you know, a group organization, right? Or like the mapping Chicana, Mexicana borderlands voices, right? So collecting the history, scanning the materials, you know, that's what we can do, right? So that the burden, and so many women we talk to, it's like, and Leanna said, after we finished our field school, she was like, I feel like a burden has been lifted from me. Because then we were able to take her materials, because one of our collaborators was the head director of the collection at UNM. And she was able to make an argument finally, because finally Chicana was in that position to bring those materials to the library. And so, you know, and to get that had a huge, the weight of history, of preserving that history, right, on our, and so many Chicanas. This is what we discovered almost immediately when we started the project. So many Chicanas had collections. so many had become the keepers of that memory. And that was just really profound. We were like, wow, like, what is it about us? Reporters? Is this an undiagnosed condition that comes to being a Chicana and just hoarding papers? There was a sense, that this was important to keep and remember. Right, so that's where we kind of like the partnerships are so important to helping with that.
May I add something? I knew that the panel's gonna be next, but just to plug another project that Lisa has been part of, and that I'm leading with other scholars and friends. It's called Mujeres de Manso Film. We're actually working on a film about Isabel, and it's Mujeres de Manso there in Tucson. And there is a website, mujeresdemansofilm.com, that has some of the archives and some of that materials, and we're working on it, but it is a big task, and the film hopefully will be out in a couple of years, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to say that, it's tough, it's a lot of work, but you all are in situations.
Yeah.
So my question is kind of like twofold. So first of all, thank you for your work. I'm exhausted just watching you. I'm blown away. And the thing is that it's almost like the more work you do, the more you find out that you have more skill, right? You mentioned that, Chicana activists are precarious, population. So, time is ticking. There's a question of where are Chicanas today, right? Many are in academia, but, in terms of the community, you have to go find them. So the question is, you still have to maybe find those that are still in the community, right? And I don't know how you go about that. That's kind of one question. The other is, most funders, they want to know when your project starts and when it ends, and then when that book comes, right? It doesn't seem like there's really an end to the project. It's going to be something that should be here for a long time, and rightly so. But then you have, the new funders feel like they already, they're exhausted because, hey, you've been doing this for so many years. I mean, we're gonna do something else, right? So then maybe the stream of resources starts to dwindle because they go, you're fine, you already did your thing, you're done, but you're not done. So I mean, those are a couple of balancing acts, you have the need to find more women, Chicana women, you have more work to do, it's labor intensive, but then you have the need for funding. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure you thought about that. I'm just wondering what some of your thoughts on it.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's the source of my panic attacks when I have it. I mean, like this idea of sustainability, like, can it be sustained? Where does it live? What happens when we die? These are questions that really kind of can keep me up at night. The first question about how we find women, we always began like in a snowball sampling kind of thing. So, and we really used our mothers as entry points. I will say that in the beginning of the project, we interviewed women in the Las Vegas party for our first set of interviews. But the reason we took our 9 mothers to California is that a lot of Chicanas, and for good reason, are very suspicious of scholars bearing gifts. They don't want to hear from us. We go and we interview them, but they never hear from us again. And they're tired, frankly. And they, this happened over and over again, particularly with Las Vegas women and certain scholars who interview them and then just drop it, not come back to them. UFW women too. We hear this a lot, right? People borrowing archives and never returning them. And so we worked with my mom in the Southwest and Linda's mom in the Midwest through their connections and networks. The networks that they developed through organizations like the National Women's Political Caucus, the Las Vegas Party, all kinds of organizations, MACWA, Mexican American Business and Professional Women also. So, I think you call it snowball sampling. And when we went to California, a lot of women we knew would not talk to us unless my mother was there. And so that's what my mother was like, she's like, Trojan horse. Trojan Rudolph. And we took her in, and then, people were like, oh, yes, I want to see Martha, I haven't seen her in so long. And they're like, okay, but we're also coming. There was at least one person who did not want to see my mother, and that's the whole story from our California trip. Where we're like, I was like, Mom, this one interview, maybe you don't want to attend, and then she ran away. She ran away and made sure of California. We did find her eventually. She got so mad at me. But, so yeah, I mean, this is really through networks that she got us. And I think someone was saying it's how much were very networked. They were very networked. And so, even without the email and without the internet, they were just like all about phone trees and stuff like that. So, in some ways, name recognition gave us an entry into women and also gave us a kind of list of women. And when we looked at the archive, that's where we see more women. That's the thing, when we started scanning the archive, it's like nombres, names, appearing, and like, who is this woman who worked for HEW? There's a whole group of women that we haven't even that were in Washington DC. A huge group. There was one Chicana, not really, it was like the Chicana of Super in Washington DC, but during the Chicana movement, like there was, yeah. Right, like you said, like just a bunch of people, right? And so that's kind of how we through networks and snowball sampling, I guess. In terms of sustainability, this is a big question for us. I don't think it's a question we've resolved. I mean, ideally, I hope we can keep going long enough and create a robust enough collection so that digital collection can be transferred to the Smithsonian once they get a reasonable leadership there. Because right now they're a terrible mess. I was on a museum, were you on that committee? I think you already talked about it, so I asked you. The Latino youth movement, part of the new Latino Museum initiative was canceled because of conservative operatives in Washington. We weren't even told, we were just like notified that we were no longer needed, so the Smithsonian is not in a great place right now, but I think it is their responsibility as the archive of our nation, the museum of our nation, to have a collection like this in the Smithsonian or the Library of Congress. So that would be the goal for like future stability, but I think until our leadership changes, this is not viable yet. We just need to keep it better. It's small. I think, are we done, or is that? Is it? Is there any? I have a question. Thank you so much.